This morning, racial unrest, recession, and the pandemic. How will all of that impact the way Texans vote in November? That's one question we will examine this morning. Democrats targeting 3 North Texas Republicans in Congress: Van Taylor, Roger Williams, and Ron Wright. We'll ask Ross Ramsey how vulnerable they really are. Unlike 2016, Donald Trump must now run on his record. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick back early from the Republican National Convention. He's with us this morning from Houston. And Republican Genevieve Collins spending big to try to topple a Democratic congressman in one of Dallas's Democratic districts. What is behind her strategy? We'll ask her.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
And good Sunday morning to you. Let's begin our program with the top political headlines in Texas over the last week. More evidence of fractures within the Republican Party. 2 former Republican congressmen from North Texas endorsed Joe Biden. Former GOP Congressman Steve Bartlett and Alan Steelman represented Dallas in the 70s and the 80s. Bartlett told the Dallas Morning News that, quote, "It's simply a matter of country over party." Bartlett and Steelman are 2 of 30 or so Republicans who served in Congress, saying they will now vote for Biden over Trump. We are a month away from the presidential debates. Hard to believe. The first one in Cleveland on September the 29th. 2 more are scheduled after that, and there is one vice presidential debate scheduled for October, about 5 weeks away. And there is a special surprise election next month that will fill a state Senate seat. This is the one that Pat Fallon is vacating in North Texas when he goes to Congress. State Rep Drew Springer is running. So is Chris Watts, the mayor of Denton there. And Shelley Luther, the salon owner who gained national attention for defying Governor Abbott's order to close her business during the height of all the shutdowns. That election is September the 29th. Whomever wins that election is going to work closely with our first guest. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick leads the state Senate, and he was supposed to be on the White House lawn last week to witness Donald Trump accepting the renomination for president for a second term. But the threat of that hurricane, that brought him home early, and he joins us from his home this morning in Houston. Governor, good to see you.
Good to be with you, Jason. Good morning to everyone.
Lots of headlines. I want to talk about some of the civil unrest. You bucked the NRA after Hispanics were targeted in El Paso. You reached out to black churches after first getting elected. The president in his speech did not talk about the civil unrest and the pain and fear that so many black Americans are experiencing now. Is that a mistake?
No, I don't think he overlooked it, actually, Jason. If you think about all of the African Americans that he had during the convention last week, they were all extraordinary. And so I think he's clearly reaching out to the black vote in the United States. And I think he's going to do very well with it, more than he did the last time. And that will be significant if he picks up 3 or 4 more points. I think he talked about law and order. He talked about justice for all. I mean, if you look at his criminal justice reform he did, that impacted many African Americans within the prison system. So I think the rhetoric is not nearly as important specifically on that issue as to what he's actually done for the African American community. Again, totally supporting the black historic colleges, the criminal justice reform, the innovation zones that Tim Scott created, and lowering the unemployment of black Americans. I mean, he did more in 3 years than Barack Obama, a black president, did for black America in 8 years. I think that's the story. The other part of the story, Jason, is no one wants to see anyone shot in an arrest that does not need to be shot, as clearly has been the case in potentially several of these police shootings over the last several years. At the same time, we can't have mob violence, and that's what he talked about. Every time, first of all, there's a lot of rush to judgment. Remember, LeBron James and some others went on the NBA court and said, hands up, don't shoot, from Ferguson. When Eric Holder, Barack Obama's AG, came in and said that wasn't the truth. So it's important before everyone rushes to judgment on any of these cases that we get the full evidence, but we want to have social justice for all, and at the same time, we want to totally support our police because they are being unfairly
Let me ask about that. Let me ask you about that, Governor. Police reform, that's something that a lot of people are calling for.
Right.
Well, what kind of legislation could you get behind in January when the legislature reconvenes that would address the concerns of so many of our Black Texan friends?
Well, we've already done a lot of things. Last session, the session before, after the shootings in Dallas. For example, one of the pieces of legislation we passed was that now people, when they get their driver's license, and students getting their driver's ed, learn how to interact with people. You know, when you get pulled over, Jason, and you start getting in a fight with a police officer, that probably is not going to lead to a good outcome. I'm not making any excuses for anything that happened, but and if you start running from the police, because you got to put yourself in that position of the police officer. They're law enforcement. They have a gun on their hip. They have a taser, and you get in a fight with them. They take that as, you're not afraid of me, and you may try to get my gun or my taser, and you may kill me. So the first thing we have to do is we've got to stop this idea that every time police tries to handcuff you or stop you or talk to you, that you're going to turn it into a fight, because it could lead to a bad outcome. That does not excuse some of the action that some of the police took after that. Don't misunderstand me, but we got to stop this idea in this country that you're going to fight back against police and run from them all the time. Secondly, we need training. So training, we need to put more money, not defund police like Austin did, into training to how to de-escalate those situations so that we don't end up in a shooting. But you're going to have a bad outcome when you attack anyone. Yeah. And that's part of this, but that does not excuse any of the actions by a handful of police in America, because, again, the overwhelming majority of police are there to protect you, they're there to work with you, and they want to help you. And God bless them that we have them.
Right. Well, let me ask you about a little more about the session. We're a little more than 4 months away from the session, about 60 seconds left here. What do you expect it to physically look like? Are we going to have plexiglass dividers? I mean, the Senate's kind of spread out a little more than the House, obviously, with fewer members. But what's it going to look like?
We want it to look as normal as possible. You know, our COVID numbers have come down dramatically in the last 6 weeks. Our hospitalizations at a high point were 10,008. They're now down to under 5,000. Our ICU COVID patients are down in some hospitals by 60%. So if we continue to see this decline by smart social distancing, wearing masks where you think you should, and if we continue to do that, then we can be close to a normal session. We'll have some plexiglass to divide in some of our hearing rooms, to divide senators from, so they're not turning and talking to each other face to face as much. We'll have protocols put in for our witnesses. We will address it, and we will do it in a smart way, and we'll be ready to get to work.
All right, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, good to see you again.
Hey, thank you, Jason.
This has been a tough year for all of us, leaders especially, but Texas Governor Greg Abbott faces 3 big tests. We are in the height of hurricane season. Just ask anyone along the Gulf Coast. Schools are opening and COVID cases are popping up on campuses. And then Labor Day weekend, that is next weekend, and that could cause another surge in cases just when the state's numbers are trending down. Ross Ramsey is among those who's going to be watching to see how the governor responds to it. He's the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Ross, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well. You know, how critical are these 3 tests for the governor? Because he's not on the ballot, obviously, in November, but could he influence how people vote for or against Republicans?
Well, I think so. I mean, the first question is really, how do you respond to the coronavirus? And, you know, the governor himself brought up these 3 things. The numbers in Texas are going generally in the right direction, although they're still at relatively high levels, about the levels they were in mid to late June. But hospitalizations are down, number of new cases is down. He wants to watch these 3 things. He pointed them out the other day. Hurricane Laura was on his radar, but we're still in hurricane season. The return to schools and Labor Day weekend. And if the cases don't jump back up, then maybe he'll undo some of the restrictions.
I want to ask about national Democrats targeting Van Taylor, Congressman Van Taylor, Roger Williams, and Ron Wright. How vulnerable are these 3 Republicans? Because these have been traditionally very red counties that they represent.
Yeah, this is the outer edge. You know, the Democrats came in looking for 6 seats, thinking that they could take 6 seats that were pretty close in 2018. They added added 1 more, and they were at 7 for a while. They've added these other 3. I guess they think if this is a 500-year Democratic flood, these guys could go too. We
shall see. Ross, thanks. Back to you in a moment. Coming up, the complicated political opinions of Texas Hispanics. We'll talk to the group that just commissioned a brand new survey. And Republican Genevieve Collins is spending big to try to topple a Democratic congressman in what is seen as a Democratic district in Dallas. We'll talk to her about strategy when Inside Texas Politics returns.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
We got our clearest picture yet of what 4 more years might look like if President Trump gets reelected. The Republican National Convention wrapped up last week, but the GOP skipped one important piece of protocol that usually happens every 4 years. The RNC did not debate and did not write a platform this year. No set of ideals that the party believes in. And one Texas lawmaker says that is a mistake. This episode is easy to listen to with your mobile phone or tablet. Just aim your camera at this QR code on your screen. It will take you directly to the latest podcast. No one ethnic group ever votes the same, but for Hispanics living in our state, which way will they split for the November election? It is a big question that's out there right now. And a poll a couple of weeks ago shows Latinos, they support Joe Biden in Texas. Narrowly, though. The Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation commissioned this poll. Regina Montoya here. She is a board member and she is very familiar with it. Good to see you again.
Well, good to see you too. Thank you. And it was a very important poll and survey that we've been taking. And again, gives you a real sense about Latinos are not monolithic, and people are going to have to work for the votes.
Well, Regina, let me ask you this: your biggest takeaway from it, what is it? Because they are not monolithic.
At the end of the day, however, you do see the difference between Latinos who are supporting Joe Biden by a larger percentage than white non-Hispanics. But one of the big differences within the material and the information is the gender gap. How many more Latinas are in particular, Hispanic women, who are in favor and supporting Joe Biden? And you'll also see differences among Hispanics because, again, when you look at Hispanics, there are Hispanics who are recent immigrants. Mm-hmm. There are others who have been here for generations. Education levels all make the difference. That's why this is so important to be looking into this survey and seeing just how specific those kinds of issues are, depending on issues like if you speak English well, right, or if you are foreign, if you are a recent immigrant, or if you've been here for many years. Those are the changes that I saw, and there are quite a few differences between and among those groups.
Regina, I want to ask you about something that I thought was interesting here. The more educated Latinos, they support President Trump. The less educated support Joe Biden. What do you make of that, and did that surprise you?
Again, I think this is one of those examples too that Latinos and Hispanics are up for grabs because they're getting information now. So it may be that as educated Hispanics get more information, they may change their minds on this. But that was an interesting nugget, absolutely. And again, that's one of those slivers that people will have to really think about as to how do you get that information to people.
And then what's the overall reason for trying to get this baseline on Hispanic political opinions in Texas? Why did y'all want to do this?
When you think of the numbers of Hispanics in our state and the fact that Hispanics are going to be the largest group in Texas in 2022, in 2021, a year earlier than people had expected. When you think about the sheer and vast numbers of Hispanics in Texas and how that could move elections nationally, it could move it on the statewide level, and then also local issues, it's clearly very, very important for people to be able to craft their message in a way that will excite people, some of the largest groups in Texas. And that's the value of this, because we haven't studied it nearly enough. We sort of blend everybody into this big group of how are Texans going to vote. We need to make sure that we understand each of the different pockets, and the Hispanic side is a very large pocket.
Regina, it is interesting data. We appreciate your time this morning. Regina Montoya from the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Get ready for campaigns to shift into high gear next weekend. After Labor Day is when they really pick up, and one Texas Republican is spending big to try to topple a freshman Democrat. Genevieve Collins allocated more than $2 million for TV commercials over the next couple of months. She is running against incumbent Colin Allred in a district that spans all of North Dallas, East Dallas, Richardson, and Garland. And Colin joins us right now. Genevieve, good to see you.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here today.
We will be seeing a lot of you on TV and online. If you had to sum up your candidacy in just a couple of sentences, why are you running for Congress?
Well, first off, I'm a businesswoman. I grown up here in the district, so I believe we need less government in business, but more business in government. I think we need more women in government to champion our experiences, our voices, and what we've been going through our entire lives. So, and I think we need someone who really understands how to knit the fabric of our community back together.
Well, Cook Political Report, among others, say this is still a likely Democratic district. There's no significant demographic change in the last 2 years. I'm curious, where do you see a path to victory?
Well, Jason, as you know, in 2018, the same time that Colin Allred won this seat, as did Governor Abbott. So this is still a very Republican, very pro-business, pro-Texas community. And there's a very clear path to victory, reigniting folks that stayed home in 2018 and ensuring that they feel connected to with my message, not just as a businesswoman, but as a woman who has worked with every school district that makes up this congressional district with my company, iStation.
I want to ask you about your opponent, though. I mean, he is kind of known for working across the aisle. In fact, he's ranked the 14th most likely Democrat to join a bipartisan bill. What has he done, though, you think that voters should throw him out for?
Well, I think it's important that voters recognize that he should be on trial for his record voting with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time. Now, he says he's a bipartisan moderate, but if you vote with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time and AOC 93% of the time, we really need to investigate your record and how poor it is in actually upholding North Texas values.
We seem to be at a hyper-partisan place in politics in this country today. How often would you work across the aisle if you were elected?
Well, as a businesswoman, this is what we have to do every day. We have to sit across the negotiating table with another party and find out how do we get to 70% and then push to 80%. Business people approach solving problems differently. That's why my ads talk about my experience in actual problem solving, because it's very clear that Congress cannot solve a single problem and that they kick the can down the line on a myriad of issues. And this Congress has demonstrated that time and time over again. And
Genevieve, you are a newcomer to politics. What do you want Dallas to know about you?
This is the first race I've ever run, but this is my home. And I'm a 7th generation Texan. My grandmother was the first woman ever elected to the Dallas City Council. That was in 1957. I look forward to being their first female representative in this district and really showcasing the compassion as well as the strength of what a Republican can and should be.
And then just a few seconds left here, too. I want to ask you, if elected, what would your first piece of legislation be?
Well, it's been something I've been advocating for a long time. When I get elected, I want to push to ensure that there's equity with broadband, Wi-Fi, and consistent access to devices so that millions of children do not get left behind like we've just experienced through the pandemic in schools. I think it's important that the government can actually put in infrastructure with broadband, Wi-Fi, and devices to ensure that every child is prepared for a thriving future.
All right, Genevieve Collins, a congressional nominee for the 32nd District in Dallas. Good luck to you. Thanks for being on with us. We appreciate it.
Jason, thank you. And I please ask any of your viewers to go to my website, www.gcforcongress.com. I appreciate you, my friend.
All right, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Coming up, racial injustice, a recession, and a pandemic, all of it likely to influence the November election. But which way? That's one of our questions next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back with us. Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram is here. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, is here as well, too. Ross, will start with you. Racial justice, racial injustice. We have the pandemic. We have the recession. This is a hell of a time to go vote. Must be tough for both campaigns. Who's going to win out on these three topics here?
I don't know. I mean, we're still deciding what's going to be the subject on voters' minds when they go to the polls. We're going to have the results from what happened from the school reopenings by then. We're going to know what's going on with the coronavirus. We're going to know what's going on maybe with this social justice stuff and how the various major sports have reacted to it. With the NBA jumping in, MLB jumping in, we'll have to see what the NFL does. This could be a real top-of-mind topic for voters.
It's a good point, Bud. What might be the subject on their minds? Because there are a lot of things out there.
Well, we'll have advertisements that'll start. We haven't even started seeing the ads yet that'll bring a lot of topics, and it'll, kind of set the tenor for this race. People are a little burned out. People, some people, may stay home, but the people who want to vote really, really want to vote. This is an election, however you feel about it, to go, make it count and cast your vote. The question is whether people will feel like getting out.
Bernadine, do you think people might stay home?
No. I think that this election and what the two parties are telling their supporters is it is an important election. I think people are going to the polls. Now, why they're going to the polls or which topics will be top of mind will be determined the closer we get. But this is going to be a heavy turnout. It is going to be incumbent upon the parties to get their people to the polls. And of course, the big question we've been asking forever, it seems like, is which way is Texas going to go? Because Democrats think they have the wind at their back. Republicans say, hey, we're not really worried about this. And that latest Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation poll said that Trump is in the lead. The president, Ross, said that Texans won't vote for Democrats because they stand for no religion, no guns, no oil, and no gas. Is he really right, though, about Texas voters?
He's betting on this being a red state, but they're still appealing to their voters. They're still appealing to their base. In their convention this past week, law and order was the conversation of the day. They're trying to turn that civil justice conversation their way. The president promised a vaccine by the end of the year. That's aimed at COVID. Trying to take these quivers out of the Democratic Democratic arrows.
But about 45 seconds left here.
It was nearly an hour before Trump brought up guns in his acceptance speech.
Right.
The Republicans are not using traditional themes. They're going on law and order.
And Bernadine, final word.
As we said earlier, it's going to be which topics are at the top of everybody's mind.
And all those campaign ads will be starting before you know it here. We appreciate it, guys. Thanks for being here. And thanks for watching as well. We'll be back next Sunday with another episode of Inside Texas Politics. Hope you stay healthy, and we'll see you then.